Hi everyone, it's Kristan. Welcome to this new episode of Explicitly Pro-Life Podcast. Today I want to play for you a conversation I just recently had on a Facebook Live with two folks who have personal experience with the foster care system. Every time I'm on college campus, if there is a hostile crowd, the foster care system will get brought up in the Q&A. And it's always a justification for abortion. And, I spend a lot of time kind of rebutting kind of just fallacies of people who don't understand what the foster care system is really for and why it was established. But I really wanted to get a little bit more to the heart of the matter and see where we as the pro-life movement can engage more in the foster care and adoption, kind of niche that world, where there are holes, there's service gaps that need to be filled. And also to figure out, are there things that we're saying that maybe we shouldn't be saying? So I invited on DJ Jordan on. He and his wife are foster parents in State Virginia. They also adopted in Virginia. I also invited Sarah Zagorski. Sarah works for Louisiana Right to Life. I met her years ago when she was in Colorado working for Coloradans for Life. Sarah was placed in foster care as a child because of abuse she endured at home with her mother, her mom, who I believe she has 11 siblings, and so it's a really heartbreaking story to hear Sarah's first 8-9 years of life. But she was eventually placed in foster care, and then she was adopted out of foster care. And so Sarah kind of will talk about her story a little bit, and I think it'll give some good perspective for us, and give us some good information of how we can be talking about the foster care and adoption system, and maybe start kind of getting the wheels turning in our heads of what we can do to engage. How can we make an impact with children and families who decide to foster? Where can we serve them? So I really hope you'll enjoy this discussion. Just as an FYI, this will be the last sort of Facebook Live COVID quarantine podcast that I'll be doing. As you all know, I've been doing Facebook Lives every week since my family entered quarantine. But now that the states are being opened and it's summer, I'm going to be out. So we will be doing other podcasts pretty soon. I've got some new guests coming up the next couple of weeks that I really think you're gonna really enjoy those conversations. And then season 1 is going to end. And we're going to go right into season 2 of the Explicitly Pro-Life Podcast. And I'm super excited for that because season 2 is going to have a theme. And so all of the episodes that I record, the guests that we have on, which I'm really excited about some of these guests, all of the content is going to be related around one theme. And so it's going to make it really easy for us when we want to share with friends. If we've got group members, community members, church members who we want to get interested in the pro-life movement, I think this will help be a better educational tool for you, where you can kind of just refer them to episodes 1 through 11, season 2. There you go. So I'm really excited for this. So stay tuned, listen to this conversation, get out pen and paper because you're going to take notes. I know I did. Hi everyone, it's Kristan Hawkins, President of Students for Life and Students for Life Action. Thank you so much for joining me tonight for this very special Facebook Live discussion about how we can make a difference when it comes to foster care and adoption. This is something that we talk a lot about in the pro-life movement, but sadly, we don't really often get into the details. And many of us don't really know that much about the foster care system, what it's like, or really what the adoption process is. And so tonight, I wanted to bring into the discussion two special folks. I'm going to introduce them in a second so we can talk about the foster care and adoption systems in the United States. These are both pro-life leaders who serve in their states in Virginia and Louisiana. And I think this is going to add a lot to our discussion and hopefully inform us as pro-lifers when we're talking about foster care, when we're talking about adoption. I know myself when I'm speaking on college campuses, this is a discussion topic that comes up every single time. And sadly, it's actually used as a justification for why abortion should be legal. It's that question of, well, if a child's going to be put in the foster care system, if the child's going to have to be placed for adoption, or what people usually say, put up for adoption, then wouldn't they be better off being aborted? And the answer always is absolutely not. So let's have a discussion about that tonight. And I hope this is helpful for you. If you've got questions, make sure you put them in the comments down below. I'll be looking at everyone's comments. And this is going to be a casual conversation. So I definitely want to add in any questions you may have for our two guests. Also, go to Students for Life, our YouTube page, youtube.com/studentsforlife. Our hashtag Why video this week features Tori Peterson, a Students for Life regional coordinator who grew up in the foster care system. And so Tori talks about her story. So I encourage you to look up her video and share it. I also encourage you to follow along what we're doing at Students for Life Action. We were honored this February to have a bill, SB 501, that was introduced in the Virginia State Legislature. It was actually backed and sponsored by pro-life Senator Bryce Reeves. And we were so excited to have lobby days with pro-life students and the pro-life Gen down in Richmond supporting this piece of foster care reform legislation, which would allow the state of Virginia to approve more individuals to become home study inspectors, to allow them to conduct background checks on prospective foster care and adoptive parents, hopefully speeding up that process and getting children placed into loving homes. This is something that we care deeply about, Students for Life Action, because as you all know, we talk a lot about what life's going to be like when Roe versus Wade is reversed. So we're making our plans, training student leaders now, because we know the day Roe is overturned and reversed, we're going to have 50 state battles. We're going to have to be fighting to make abortion illegal in states, but we also are going to have to work just as hard to make abortion unthinkable and to make sure all the support services are in place so no woman ever again feels like she has to choose between the life of her child and her education or her career or her lifelong prosperity. We want her to know that she can choose life, and we'll be there. We, the pro-life community, will be there to support her, and we'll be there the entire way. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our special guest. First, I'm going to introduce DJ Jordan. DJ is the Vice President of Pinkston Public Affairs. He is, prior to joining Pinkston, he was a communications director for a U.S. Senator. He was communications director for the U.S. House Committee on Small Business. He was also the press secretary for a U.S. House of Representatives member. He previously worked at both CNN and Fox News, where as an assignment editor and producer, he helped develop the breaking coverage of the news and feature news. DJ earned a bachelor's degree in broadcast communication from Liberty University and a master's degree in public management from Johns Hopkins University. He served on the boards of several state and nonprofit agencies focused on family issues in Virginia, including the State Board of Social Services and the Virginia Kids Belong, which advocates for children in the foster care system. My second guest tonight is Sarah Zagorski. She is the Adoption Education Director at Louisiana Right to Life. Born at only 26 and a half weeks gestation, Sarah's story is one of survival, hope, and healing. She is one of 11 siblings who was raised and brought into a family living in extreme poverty conditions. After she was sexually abused by a family member, Sarah was adopted at the age of 9 by a loving family after spending 7.5 years in the Louisiana foster care system. She previously served as the executive director of Colorado Citizens for Life, the state affiliate for the National Right to Life, and was a staff writer for lifenews.com. If you're pro-life, you've probably read some of Sarah's work. In 2012, she graduated from Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, which a bachelor's degree in communications and biblical studies. Before her service in Colorado, she was a communications director at Louisiana Right to Life, where she worked to end abortion through education, legislation, activism, and service, and where she continues on that work today. So welcome, DJ and Sarah. Thanks for joining me tonight.
It's great to have this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, it's super exciting to have this discussion. We talk a lot about this in the pro-life movement. So I kind of want to just first start by asking you all some of your stories. DJ, can you start by kind of sharing your personal story with the foster care adoption systems?
Yeah, my wife and I were introduced to the foster care and adoption space around the year of 2010. And leading up to that time, my wife and I both served at a pregnancy center. And we would constantly encourage men and women who are facing unplanned pregnancies to consider adoption, to consider delivering their child and bringing that pregnancy to full term. And over a couple of years, we began to, ask ourselves, we're encouraging all these people to consider adoption, foster care, and things like that. But we've never, seriously thought about it ourselves or even looked into it. And so in 2010, we attended an event called Orphans Sunday, which is actually a global event that's put on by the Christian Alliance for Orphans, where they encourage Christians, Catholics, churches, congregations to talk about adoption, foster care, and things like that, and specifically looking at what the Bible says to the church about caring for orphans and widows and vulnerable populations. And so we attended the event, and we believe that that was for us. We felt called to do it. And so we started our journey becoming a licensed foster parent the following summer in 2011. God has a sense of humor. We actually started our training to become a foster parent in July of 2011. Fast forward 2 years after that, we ended up adopting a little girl from foster care who was born in July of 2011, the same exact month that we started our training. And so we've been a foster parent off and on since then. We have 4 children total, 3 biological, 1 adopted from foster care.
That's awesome. What an amazing story and testimony. Thank you. And so you can totally understand if you hear my children in the background, DJ, because you're used to having a loud house with 4 kids.
All of my kids are downstairs and I hear them. Yes.
I hear them. They'll be whispering out, "Mom's on Facebook. Be quiet." All right, Sarah, can you share with us maybe your story a little bit further? I kind of read a little bit into the bio, but I'd like to hear, your story from your perspective and how where you are today.
Sure, absolutely. Well, my story is really my mother's story. My mother came to America from Honduras as a teenager, and when she came here, she was running from a domestic abuse situation, and she started having kids really early. She was in 2 abusive marriages and ended up having 11 children total. I was her number 7, and unfortunately, because of her mental health issues combined with abusive brothers in my family, an abusive stepfather in my family, we were placed into care. And I was placed into care for the very first time at 16 months. I met my foster care parents with just like a rag on and an empty bottle, and they welcomed me with open arms. And the most beautiful thing about it to me is I know from them that social workers warned them about me specifically because of my family's history of mental illness. They warned them specifically about the future issues I might have, the traumas I might have. And those fears were well founded from the social workers. However, they said, you know what, we're committed to Sarah no matter what. We're committed to her for the long haul. That was their perspective going in. And they got me at 16 months. They were told that. And then they were also told, hey, you could get a call in the middle of the night. You could get a call at any juncture in this process, and Sarah could be taken away. Initially, I was supposed to be with them for a couple of months, and the state said, well, that's what we hope, but it could be less, it could be more, whatever. And they did get that phone call, and I did return to my biological family, where I experienced abuse and neglect and a host of issues. That really primarily the root of those things, at least in my family, was mental illness, my mother's poverty, and her issues finding a job, her issues with instability, of course, being a Hispanic woman and having racial prejudice in our family, just observing those things. So those were the things that led our family into care. But unfortunately, because the state of Louisiana just took a very long time to terminate her rights, even though abuse was found specifically in my case very early, it took almost 8 years until her rights were terminated, and I was adopted when I was 9. So that's the Cliff Note version of that. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. It's amazing to hear all of this trauma that you endured as a child, but yet now as an adult, this is what you do. You're educating folks about foster care, about the adoption systems, there at Louisiana Right to Life. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're trying to accomplish within Louisiana Right to Life, the premier pro-life organization in the state of Louisiana, one of the best, state right to life affiliates in the country? What is it that you're specifically focusing on there?
My focus is specifically to get to know and to understand the abortion vulnerable woman and to present adoption as a loving option to her. See, in my mother's situation, I know that the 2 abortions she had prior to her encounter with me, her shattered heart was never going to be repaired by shattering her babies in abortion. Her devastation never fixed by dismembering her children. And she even told me that herself, that the 2 abortions she had prior to her pregnancy with me brought her great grief and trauma and sorrow. So I look at adoption as the solution in this broken world to the social problems my family experienced, as the only good solution. And of course, advancing foster care as best we can, knowing that there are many families that want to take in children that were, like mine, vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Now, DJ, hearing Sarah's story and then your personal story, you and your wife's story with adoption, what are some things that you think that we as the pro-life community need to know about the foster care and adoption systems? Like what do we need to be working on, focusing on? And are there things that we need to stop saying, and maybe rephrase a little bit? What are your thoughts on that, DJ?
Wow, I hope you have time because this answer will be about an hour. No, I'm just kidding. Man, there's so much, but I would love to narrow down just on a few things. First of all, I love that Students for Life is truly pro-life. You are not just pro-birth. And I feel that the pro-life community needs to follow that lead and caring for vulnerable human life from the womb to the tomb. And so there's a lot of vulnerability within the foster care. And it's important to remember, the pro-life community to especially remember, that most children in foster care are in it because of abuse or neglect from their biological families. But there are many biological families. There's an opportunity for redemption. And so we shouldn't look at foster care simply and foster children simply as needing to be rescued by the pro-life community. Reunification should continue to be the number one priority of foster care, and we should walk alongside the biological family because in many cases, they themselves have been the victim of other abuses. And so we should try to work with those families as much as possible, those parents as much as possible. But if it is not possible, if reunification is not possible, in most states, they normally wait about a year to analyze where the biological parents are. If that's not possible, then aggressively pursue adoption. Mm-hmm. And the pro-life community needs to be a part of the entire spectrum, supporting biological families when possible, supporting foster children, understanding that reunification is the number one goal. But if that doesn't happen, then being there for adoption. And then another thing is that we do need to still applaud birth mothers who may lose their child because of abuse themselves, drug addiction, a host of a variety of things. My daughter, her mother and father both dealt with alcoholism, mental illness, poverty, and issues with the criminal justice system. And it's important for my daughter to know that her biological mother chose life. Mm-hmm. She chose life. And at one point, my daughter's biological mother actually voluntarily gave her parental rights to us because she saw that her daughter would ultimately have a better life. And so that doesn't always happen with every situation, but it's important for the pro-life community to be a part of the entire process all the way through.
What do you think, DJ, in terms of like legislation? And I know this is going to be a big year. It's like the most important election in the pro-life movement's history ever. I'm going to say this over and over and over again. Vote pro-life first. But, we're going up, gearing up for the election. We're going to be talking about politics, and then we're going to go, and then the state legislative sessions are going to start again in January 2021. And this is something I've been asking our team about, and just meeting with different pro-lifers of how can we hit the ground running in 2021? What kind of legislation can be out there to start laying this groundwork for this post-Roe America, because we can't wait until Roe versus Wade is reversed and then, half the states make abortion illegal, half the states permit abortion, and then have to work backwards and say, oh my gosh, we have to get these support systems in place for women. We need to be preparing and laying that groundwork now, showing America that we don't need abortion. Every excuse they offer is why, we have abortion. That's simply unnecessary. Are there pieces of legislation? Are there holes that you think that we should start when we're, going to the capitals and we're lobbying for our 20-week paying capable bills? What else we could be lobbying for when it comes to adoption and foster care?
Well, there's a number of things that we can lobby for. One is something that you guys have already pushed for in Virginia with Senator Bryce Reeves, and that is making sure that we have more social workers who can do home studies, which is very, very important. Unfortunately, the foster care and the adoption, even domestic private infant adoption, the process is very, very tedious. And a lot of people, parents like myself, look at the process, and oftentimes, they're blown away and discouraged about the bureaucracy and the tedious process. And so I think it's very important for us to look at ways that we can take some of that bureaucracy away. Yes, we want to be sure to have background checks and home studies and things like that. But many social workers' jobs, they become paper pushers when originally that wasn't their job. That wasn't their intent. They need to be trusted. Social workers need to be trusted to analyze situations and families and do what they need to do to get children into loving homes. And so I think the paperwork in a lot of Department of Social Services and Human Services across the country is really vitally important. And I also want to remind you, a lot of those policies are state level policies. Mm-hmm. I'm glad you talked about state legislatures and not just talking about the U.S. Congress. Most of the rules for adoption and foster care are state based. They're going to differ. They're going to differ pretty widely. Even states that are next to each other. And so that's one thing I'd really encourage.
Sarah, what about you? What do you think are some of the things that the pro-life movement, should be aware of about the foster care and adoption systems, and especially as someone who was raised in this traumatic childhood home, who was a foster child, who was then adopted? What do you wish the pro-life movement would do more of, or maybe do less of?
So I think in my case, what strengthened my own pro-life convictions was the fact that my foster care family was not just dedicated to me, but they were dedicated to my birth mother and to my siblings. And even when I went back home, they would bring care packages to them of hygiene items and food, even though they knew very well that those things would get destroyed, that those things would get damaged, that I might not even get them. But they were dedicated to our family as a whole. And I think, like DJ was saying, the goal of foster care, and we need to remember this, is reunification. And unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. And when it does, we need to find ways to speed up the process for kids who are waiting ready to be adopted, so they don't age out of the system, so that we can find families for them that can take them in and have the permanent adoption provides, which I'm a big advocate for myself.
What do you think, as a child, who was raised in the system, what are ways, so if someone isn't ready or able to become a foster parent right now, what are ways you can get involved and help foster care children?
Sure. So there's something called respite care, where you can take in a foster care child for another family that has them, so they can get a little break and kind of connect together. Another thing is called CASA, court-appointed advocates for foster care kids. That's another thing you can do to support foster care kids in the judicial process and the process before the court system. You can also just get involved in providing practical items to families. And a lot of people come to me and say, I can't take in a foster kid right now. I'm not prepared for that. My family isn't prepared for that. But there's a plethora of other things you can do to support a foster care family just by helping them out with their regular needs.
Mm-hmm. DJ, what do you think? I mean, I often think when I talk to folks about, these children that are in need right in our community. What do you think the church could be doing a better job of?
I love the suggestions that she gave. Those are phenomenal. I want to add to that you can support foster families. Just something as practical as having a designated group of families that regularly are checking in on a family for practical needs. You wouldn't be surprised how much just a cooked meal, a dinner, for a foster family who just received a new child will go. Is tremendous. And then at times you need, different supplies in your home. You might not have a rocking chair. You might not have a play plan. Because oftentimes if you're a foster family, you're respite or long term, normally you're getting a call probably a day or two before they need to place that child in your home. And you may not have the opportunity to go to the store, go to Target or whatever, and get everything you need to be ready. And so when we have had children in our home, we've fostered and we've adopted. And each time we've had a group of family members or family members and also church family members to reach out and to support us, especially over those coming in. We've had families that will do yard work, so that I won't have to worry about that. And I can, do a lot of the other things that were required for having a new child. And so churches, I would encourage, so go ahead and set up, foster care and adoption ministries so that you can have and discuss what type of support groups that you can build within your congregation for individuals who may want to do this. One last thing, churches can also have a regular kind of observance at their church where they bring in resources and bring in social workers to talk about the process. A lot of people I talk to, especially people of faith, can be very, very hesitant to go to a government entity to learn about the process because the trust may not be there. And that's why I think it's really important to have faith-based child welfare agencies, and the government should definitely support that. But it'd be great for churches to just designate one day a year. Designate maybe a day in November, which is National Adoption Month, or maybe a day in May, which is National Foster Care Month, to bringing in social workers, to bringing in experts about this, to bring in foster parents so that they can tell their story to other people who may be interested, I think goes a long way for churches and congregations.
Yeah, I definitely, that the respite care notion of really how do you provide respite care for families. I think I had a friend who had a child with severe autism, and she said, one of the biggest challenges was they weren't able to go to church as a family anymore, that, their child was too old to be in the nursery and there weren't caregivers there at the church. And so they just stopped going to church. And it was their church, the local church, who came together and said, we're going to come in and provide volunteers to come to your home, to watch your child, care for your child, so you can and your husband can go to church. And that's such an amazing concept. It's something that, I know we certainly struggle with here at the Hawkins house with cystic fibrosis in the winter. We don't go places. My husband and I don't go at places just because we don't want to expose our children to germs. Everyone now with COVID is living how we live all the time. But I think that respite care idea, especially if you're a family who maybe not in place or not able to foster right now, that might be a way for you to start really getting involved and maybe start learning a little bit more about the foster care system.
Yeah, if I may add on to that as well, talked about something churches can do, and it would be wonderful to have churches that understand some of the trauma that these children have. And I've been to churches before. I've been involved with churches who have workers in children's ministry, daycare, youth ministry, so on and so on, that are trauma trained, that are that are able to deal with a lot of the issues that some of these kids may come with, whether it's a physical disability, mental disability, or whatever. And that's what the body of Christ should be. McLean Bible Church is a big church in the D.C. area, and they are known for their disability ministry, but they also have a lot of competency about foster care trauma and taking care of kids who come from hard places. They have a multitude of rooms for children who, may need some time away. They create space where A mom may need to stand up in the back of the congregation with their child because they're restless. And instead of having people in church who judge them and, maybe make, eyes and faces with them that maybe this isn't the place for them, we need to be accepting to them. Church should be one of the safest places that they can come to no matter what's going on with their children.
That's right. Absolutely. Now, before I go to Sarah, I've got some hard questions for Sarah, but I'm going to ask you one, DJ, because I think you might have a unique perspective on this. And this is a question that came in over Facebook. What is the process for a person, whether they're married or single, if they want to become a foster parent? Can you kind of describe that process and what it's like?
Sure, that's a great question. And I'm glad to do this with the Students for Life, because there's so many young people who are in college and high school, and you haven't yet made a decision about children or a spouse or whatever. And I would just encourage all the young people listening in, go ahead and just start doing a little bit of research on the process and pray about whether or not God is calling you to include adoption or foster care in your plan. It's not for everyone. I'll tell you that right now, and there's no condemnation if you're feeling like, that's not for me. I want to be a missionary, in South America. There's no condemnation there. Not everybody has to be a foster parent or an adoptive parent, but the church overall, the body of Christ, needs to definitely be involved with that. The process is, first of all, normally you start by going to an orientation meeting where you will meet with agency social workers or with your local city or county social workers about the process. Then after that, you go through a training process. Most states, they call it a PRIDE, Pride, which stands for, it's an acronym for something. But basically, the government requires you to go through classes to talk about a lot of these things here, whether it's, trauma. They want to make sure that the families who are getting into this know about all of the many possibilities and all of the resources that are available. And that training process can take anywhere from 4 weeks to as long as 8 or 10 weeks. And so that's the next step. After that, then you do something called a home study, which is when the social worker comes to your house and basically analyzes and makes sure that your house is a safe place for a foster child to come in. During that home study process, they will also go through a background check just to make sure that you have a clean history, make sure that you're not a predator or anything like that. Normally, there will be an interview process with every person in your house, including your children, just to make sure that there are no kind of red flags. And then after that, you become a licensed foster parent. And the process for fostering in foster care or adopting in foster care are the same. Even if you just want to adopt through foster care, you got to go through all of that as well. Once you become a licensed foster parent, then a social worker will begin to present cases to you, whether they think is a good fit. Before they do that, they're going to ask your preferences if you have any preferences at all. Some people may say, look, I got small children, so I'd rather keep the kind of preference or age range to 8 and under. And if that's the case for you, that's okay. There are other families who are saying, we want teenagers. We don't want to have any small children. We're in a different stage of life or whatever. Can you please, just present us with teenagers? Some people will say, I only want this particular gender. I have other daughters and I only want to have, possibly a daughter. And so that's normally the process. And then it could take, right away before you get a child. It could be weeks or months.
That's great. That's a great summary of kind of the process. So thank you for that. Sarah, I want to ask you some, maybe a couple hard questions that I've certainly gotten on campuses that I've seen on, Facebook or Twitter when, the talk about abortion comes up or a foster care adoption comes up. Can kids who end up in the foster care system, it's so sad to see so many use those children as an excuse for why abortion should remain legal. they say it's better to, protect a child from potential suffering. Therefore, we should abort them. What would you say to someone like that who says, these children, they're going to end up in foster care, they're going to be abused? Why would you want to put anyone through this amount of suffering? Isn't abortion the more compassionate, more loving option?
I would say that the 7.5 years I spent and the time I spent with my mother, those were temporary. That was a temporary situation. And now I have the life I have today because my mother did choose life in the end. And I think they are short-sighting themselves. They aren't seeing the full picture. That was a very small part of my life compared to the whole, that I would go on to college, that I'd get married, that I'd have children, that I'd have a job that I love. They can't see that when they look at my early childhood and determine my future on those years. And I understand that concern. And you had asked earlier, what can the pro-life community do better? And I think I've heard a lot of times, not Students for Life definitely, but some pro-life organizations will diminish the suffering children go through in foster care. And I'm here to say that suffering was real and present. I experienced hunger that was like leeches eating the inside of your stomach. It was so severe. I saw my brothers and sisters eat bugs off the floor, kind of severe. But I can tell you those things, and I can also tell you that that was a very short time of my life compared to my whole life. And I also know, like I said earlier, that my mother's history with abortion only brought her more devastation and more pain. So those would be the main things I would say, that is not, that's a very short-sighted vision. It doesn't determine the rest of my life, my years in care. So
why do you think, how have you overcome this trauma? Obviously, when you experience trauma at such a young age, it's something that's going to stay with you the rest of your life. It's not something that you just suddenly forget. What were the things that helped you kind of overcome this and to become this person who is willing to be outspoken and tell your story and being there on the front lines, serving other women and kind of being that voice of saying, this is okay. You can choose life. You're strong enough to do this. Let's help you make a plan.
I think the biggest thing that helped me was obviously the support of my foster care family, their dedication to me from the very beginning. I ended up also getting tuberculosis during my time because I was a very sick child, which tuberculosis is a lung disease that can be life-threatening, but they were with me providing that care every step of the way. And then the second thing I would say, they provided me with very solid counseling services, which I really needed. And then, of course, later on in life, forgiving my birth mother, finding it in me to see and to look at her life, to survey her life, and come to understand what brought her to where she was and what caused her to be unable to care for us in the way that she should have. And that forgiveness brought a lot of peace and a lot of healing for me.
That's amazing. Do you still have contact with your siblings?
I do. Some of them did not, I would say, make it in a way. I had a sister who overdosed on drugs when she was 19 and left a daughter behind. It was very tragic. I have some siblings that have some mental health problems that are very severe. But I would say that I have some that I'm in really good relationship with, and we know that we've kind of been through it all together and that we've made it. And that's been a really amazing experience.
Wow. What else can we be doing? I think about like what you were saying, your story. It seemed like it took a really long time for you to get into a loving home. Were there delays there? Is there something practical that the pro-life movement really needs to be aware of like, these are things we need to be looking out for, making sure children aren't getting left in homes where they're starving, where they're being abused. What can we do to stop that?
Yeah, it wasn't that it took long to place me in a loving home as much as it took the state a long time to determine that my mother's rights should be terminated. And that's a very tricky thing, balancing, now that I'm a mother, the day I met my son, I realized what a big decision that is to terminate a parental rights. And I began to understand that better. But the state took a very long time, even though abuse was well-founded early in my situation. So I think that was the determining factor for me. I think that finding families that are committed from the very beginning, regardless of what happens to the child, regardless if adoption is the ultimate end, right? So for me, like we were saying earlier, in foster care, reunification is always the goal. But because my parents, my very pro-life foster care parents, did not look at that and say, even if Sarah isn't with us for the rest of our lives, we're devoted to her. We're devoted to her family. Finding more families like that, that is going to, I think, advance the pro-life cause.
Families like DJs.
Yeah. Yes. Like you.
Exactly. One more question, and then I'll put DJ in the hot seat. What about kids who are aging out of the system? I know I was reading something the other day about just the rate of homelessness. So children who age out of the foster care system, I mean, it's like well over 25% are experiencing some form of homelessness because they don't have a family to go to. What are some things that we can be looking out for, ways we can be serving these children who were never adopted and they age out of the system, and what happens to them?
So I think one of the things we did in Louisiana is they extended that age out to 21. And I see a lot of states doing that. I think that's a very wise thing to do because a child that's been through trauma, of course, developmentally, the maturity level of an 18-year-old kid that's been in home to home to home is going to be, I think, altered or damaged in some way. So when they're 18 and they age out, they have nowhere to go. They can't hold down a job. They have all this past trauma they're dealing with. So I think extending that age to 21 is a very wise thing. And of course, I think, in my case, I had siblings that aged out of foster care, unfortunately. And it's largely because they didn't have a fit with a family and they kept going to each family and having to restart over. And the trauma that does to a child is just unimaginable. It's hard to even place because you have no sense of permanency and you end up homeless after that. And of course, that just follows a pattern. My birth mother experienced homelessness over the course of her life. So to see my other siblings go through that was devastating.
DJ, so when we talk about, the church, how the church can get involved and how we can help families, foster families, is there something we can be doing to help support social workers, supporting them? Is this something where we need to be encouraging pro-life Christians to seek out and explore the social work kind of profession?
I'm so glad you brought that up. I served on the Virginia State Board of Social Services for 4 years. It's a volunteer resident citizen appointment by the governor. And I was appointed by Governor Bob McDonnell back in 2013. And I really, really love the work that we did with social services. And I had already knew a lot about the foster care process and social services. But that was a deep dive. And I got to know a lot of the social workers across the Commonwealth of Virginia where I live. And I found out that, number one, they are overworked and underpaid and very stressed. Their jobs have become a paper pusher, bureaucratic job. And we have a terrible rate of or a cycle of people leaving the job over the last 5 to 10 years because it is so hard. And you got to think about some of the stuff that they witness. This is Child Protective Services. These are the people who get the call with the police when there's been an abuse situation. And they deal with an unimaginable amount of things. And so Christians need to have compassion for social workers. And we need to reach out to our local public, city and county, DHS or DSS, whatever you call your social workers in your own community. Churches should reach out to them and ask for ways to be able to serve them and support them. Something as simple as getting them a meal one day and a note saying that we support you and appreciate that the work that you're doing on behalf of our community can go a long way. And also, yes, we need more people of faith within social services. Most people who have studied through that, they go through a lot, and we need a lot. Both you and I went to a Christian undergrad, and I don't think either one of our schools has a social work program. I could be wrong. Neither one of the schools have a child welfare. So Christian schools, if you go to a Christian school and you're listening to this right now, go to your deans, go to your president and start asking them, why don't we have a social work program here? We need to have people of faith in this space. We're supposed to be salt and light in the earth, And that includes every single industry, no matter how dark you may think it is. We need to have people of faith there. And so I'm glad you brought that up. Oftentimes, many conservatives like myself have a negative viewpoint of social workers, and we've got to end that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I don't know, this conversation has given me a lot of ideas. I've taken a few notes along the way. I hope it's given you all a lot to think about. There's just so much. There's so much to unpack here. So I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. But before we go, I have a final question I wanted to ask both DJ and also ask Sarah. So Sarah, I'll start with you. If you could tell a parent or a child in the foster care system one thing, what would you tell them?
I would tell a foster care child that their birth parents love them, and that although it's painful right now, it will end, and they're blessed to have the foster care parents they do to love and support them as well as their birth parents.
DJ?
And I would say that in addition to their birth parents loving them, there are a community of people in churches, in communities, all over this country who also unconditionally love them and are ready to mentor them. They're ready to support them, ready to adopt them if need be, or just be a short-term foster situation. There's lots and lots of people out there like my family, me and my wife, who love them, even though we don't even know them. And this is something that Gloria and I, have done. Gloria's my wife, and we've opened up our home to foster youth who have aged out and other people who are in vulnerable situations. And we've had family live with us, single mothers live with us. We've had young ladies who have aged out and don't have a home to go to for holidays, and they come and stay with us. There are people like us all over the country. They're all over. And so if you are watching this, reach out to Students for Life. Reach out to me. Even for women who may be watching this, who you're not sure what you're going to do with the child that's living inside of you. There are families, there are people who will walk alongside with you. You can reach out to me if you want to. I'm DJ Jordan VA on Instagram, Twitter. My DMs are open. Reach out. We'd love to help you.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, DJ, for that and for giving us your contact information. I think you're more tech savvy than I am. I didn't even know that was a phrase. My DMs are open. Sarah, how do folks get in touch with you and kind of follow your work there in Louisiana Right to Life?
Sure. So they can always email me at sarah@prolifelouisiana.org, or they can follow me on Instagram, sarah.zagorski, and you'll see my story in the bio. And I also have a website, sarahzagorski.com, so you can go read my full story there as well.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you, DJ, for being so open tonight and being willing to share your stories and share it for all of us so that we can do a better job of being advocates for children in foster care, for being better spokespersons for the pro-life movement, and kind of showing the world, showing the nation that this is who we are, and that a part of our mission of abolishing abortion, making abortion unthinkable, is making sure that we support families and women and children all across America. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Make sure you continue to follow Students for Life. You can subscribe for our email list on our website, or like or share this episode, this Facebook Live, or I'm also going to put this up on my podcast so you can follow along. It's Explicitly Pro-Life, the podcast. Thanks, guys. Good night.